Welcome to As the Story Grows. I'm Brian Patton. Today we welcome back Austin Visser from The Undertaking to the podcast. The Undertaking self-released Superstitions back in February, with the Charon Collective releasing the CD in March. Austin talks about releasing music at the wrong time, how playing live has informed how The Undertaking approaches writing music, how long the band can keep going, getting to play Furnace Fest, being featured on Hate 5/6, and more. Austin's a rad dude, and I'm stoked to have him back on the show. Make sure you check out Superstitions if you haven't, and if you're headed to Furnace Fest this year, go see The Undertaking. Sharing is caring, and the best way to help out as the story grows is to share an episode with like-minded people. The other day, my brother-in-law texted me asking if I had ever listened to Dayseeker, and I was able to share my interview with Rory with him, and he listened and enjoyed it. It's an easy way to support the show. If you want to take that support to the next level, join us on Patreon. All Patreon members get early access to every episode of the podcast. A link will be in the show notes. Also in the show notes, you will find links to the Discord server where we hang out and talk about music and more, and a link to the mailing list. I hope everyone enjoys today's chat with Austin Visser from The Undertaking.
Burn it to the ground, fuming lies again, poison from my mouth. Vomit of destroy, laying at my feet, smoke fills up my lungs. Ripped apart my world for a page again, venom in my blood.
My knee's been swollen for like over a month now, so I had to go another orthopedic follow-up, and they were like, just go get an MRI. We don't know what's going on. So it's like,
is it like a ACL thing or just general getting older?
I think just getting older. Like, I had my kids at the pool. The best I can assume is I took my kids to the pool and I went down the slide with them, and I landed funny because it's shallow, and I hurt my ankle, and then I just overcompensated and then hurt my knee in the process. And it's a month later and it's still swollen because I have to chase my children around and mow them on still.
Dude, well, how old are you?
I'm 38.
Okay, I'm 36.
Yeah.
And I have a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 2.5-year-old.
Yeah.
And it's probably 2 years ago now. I was holding my then 7-year-old. He's a big kid. Mm-hmm. And I fell. Dude, long story short, I was like up on a block wall because we were looking at a possum that was up on our fence.
Oh, man.
And I stepped off the wall and I slipped with him, and I hurt my lower back. And since then, it's like a whole sciatica thing that always pops up every couple months. And it's like one of those things of like, well, I guess I can't hold my 9. Well, he's 9 now. I guess I can't hold my 9-year-old up on a wall because I'm getting older. Anyways, I know exactly how that goes.
Yeah. It's good stuff. Good stuff, man. Let's start with a really tough question for you. What happened to the Padres this year?
I defer. I'm not answering that question. Dude, I was just talking to a couple buddies, and this is probably going down as the worst season I've ever watched for the Padres. Just because going in with expectations and all the different things that we like, just the roster, everything on paper, like, should have been good, and this is just miserable. So we've been holding out hope, and like we got 50 games left, and we have to go 26-14, like just to get to 500 now, and so I think we're losing hope now.
It's like a stacked roster too, man. It's like
long story short too, it's like the 99%. We're like the one. This season has been like the 1% outcome. Like just in terms of everything going wrong. And I don't know if you follow just the statistics on 1-run games. We're like 4-20 and we're 0-10 or something in extra innings. So it's just been miserable.
Yeah. I feel for you. I wanted somebody to the Dodgers. So
we can't. Nobody's going to do it. Nobody can do it. It's impossible.
We can do it. we can.
You know, in the playoffs, but in the NL West,
the NL West,
nobody can do it.
Yeah. Good times.
Yeah, I'm jealous. I'm assuming you're a Braves fan, and you guys, your season's just been like the exact opposite of ours.
It's been magical.
Yeah.
Every day is like must-watch TV. It's like, I mean, Atlanta might hit 21 runs, which they did the other day against the Mets.
Yeah.
That's fun. That's fun.
Well, even what Olsen, anyways, we're a music podcast. So I could talk sports all day long, but like what Olsen's doing is insane because he's now surpassed Ohtani for the lead league in home runs, and I love it.
Yeah. It's good times. Good times. All right. Well, let's talk about music. Funeral Psalms comes out in 2021. Like, what was that release like for you guys? Like, kind of the in between of like, there's still some lockdowns, things were opening up. Like, it was more open, later 21. Like, what was that process of releasing that album? And like, I know you're not like a big touring band, but you've been playing shows and out there trying to.
Well, one, thanks for having me on. This is the second time on the show. And I mean, that was even just thinking about before we hopped on, like, okay, the last time I was on, we were like, probably just announced Solid State and like maybe hadn't even released Funeral Psalms yet. But honestly, dude, 2.5 years after that release, I think one of the biggest lessons that we learned is we just for a small band that can't get on the road and tour a ton, that was like the worst time for us, in our opinion, just from the lessons that we took and like some of the stuff that we're seeing from it. That was just such a bad time for us to try to launch something where we thought, okay, people would be at home, so they might be eager to maybe find a new band or have something new come across their plate. But that just like really wasn't the case. And that I start with the negative because it's just such like a fascinating case study of trying to launch a product that's so driven by a live performance when that was not an option. And early on in the pandemic, we had decided not to do a live stream. So many bands were pouring so much money into those and they weren't recouping it. Like, I don't know if you remember, Under Oath did that first live stream and like the reports came through the industry that they just made like an insane amount of money. And so then people were trying to copy that. And we saw a bunch of bands pour a good amount of money into these live streams and didn't recoup it. And then for us, like we knew our live performance would not translate to a screen. And so we chose not to do that. Anyways, like for us to have to launch this album that then we couldn't show people like this is the real tangible product of the Undertaking, like it was just a bummer for us. The flip side of that, I think we talked last time, Solid State and the release of that album was just a dream come true for us. I mean, being 36 and kind of being out of the music industry for so long, all of us in the band to be able to do that is just the coolest thing that we have done and probably will do in our lives. Like we've been talking lately that Solid State and releasing Funeral Psalms is probably the coolest thing that we've done as a band. And now Furnace Fest is like the second coolest thing. So being able to do these like really rad things at like a later age in life is just something we don't take for granted. and I mean, the final note on that is like people love Funeral Psalms and it's just so cool now, like 2 years later to have people still finding it, and the relationship and the fans that we've gotten from that have been people that I'm friends with now online, which now that we're getting out there and touring more, it's the coolest thing. My favorite thing about touring is obviously hitting the road with my buds and traveling to country or the cities that I've never been to in the United States. But then also when we go to play a show, there's like 4, 5, 6, maybe 10 people that come to these shows that I've never met in person, and to be able to be like, oh, you're this guy that I've talked to online or interacted with on Instagram or Twitter. It's just a really cool opportunity, and be like, oh yeah, we're like real people and just having like a ton of fun doing this. Yeah, that's rad. Well, then let me ask, like, what happened with Solid State? Did you just have like the one album deal or? The long story, the short story is it was a 1 album contract. Okay. And so that's what going in, Adam with Solid State knew that we were kind of dads who were going to be more of a studio band, and we did 1 album. And then that was that. And then when it came time for us to kind of approach them to be like, hey, would you guys be interested in doing another album? I don't really talk about this too much. Then the long short of it is that our streaming numbers, our monthly listeners, our Instagram followers, like weren't really enough for them to justify putting more money into the band, which is just a bummer but also the truth of the industry these days. One of our dreams, or whatever we'll talk about, is, man, if the Undertaking came out on Solid State in like 2004 or 2005, like what would be different? Because I think the whole industry would have just been completely different beast. But now it's monthly listeners on Spotify, streams on Spotify, playlisting on Spotify, and kind of that stuff. And the truth of it is, you look at our numbers and it's not quite up to par with some of the other bands that they have. And there's some other, they've had a lot of turnover recently. And I think that the industry in general is just changing. So, which then for us, the flip side of like, oh, we would have loved to have stayed with them, is then we got to release Superstitions on our own. And then the timeline of that, we're able to kind of do whatever we want and release music whenever we want, which isn't the case when you're in a label, because you're trying to line up releases with other people. And I know some buddies that have an album done for like a year and they're still waiting for their release date from a label. And so like for us, especially older, like our timeline as a band is kind of ticking. Like, I don't think that we're going to be able to do this like that much longer. And so our mode of operation is like, dude, let's just like bang out a bunch of stuff. And so we released Superstitions, the EP that we did earlier this year. And we have like 8-9 demos kind of ready to go to start recording. So we're going to try to start to put together another album, and we'll shop it out, because we'll see if anybody wants to take it, but the chances are slim. And if that's the case, then we'll just put it out on our own.
Yeah.
You see my cat? He just
Yeah.
He's like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel like your time as a band is ticking as a live band, or just like, you just think like the act of getting together and writing is like not going to be there? Because like, if you're independent question, and can do it on your own, then like, I don't know, who cares, right?
There's a couple different nuances to me saying that. One, well, actually, that's a really interesting. I'm actually incorrect with that, because the older my kids get, the more I actually can tour. So when Funeral Psalms came out, I had a 7-year-old, 5-year-old, and a newborn, and now they're 9, 7, and 2.5. And so 2 of my kids just went to school today. So school's back in session. And the older they get, the more like autonomous they are at home. So if I'm leaving my wife behind with the kids, it's not as big of an ask as it used to be.
Yeah.
So on that level, we have more freedom as a band, and some of the other guys have kids too. So we're all kind of in the same scenario, but maybe the most, unique situation is it's money. And so at some point, like, we can't just keep dumping money into recording and funding tours or merch, because it's a risk. Every single time that we make a decision, it's a big risk. So in April of 2023, we did a 10-day run with Meadows and Empty on the East Coast. And going into that, it's like, all right, are we willing and able to risk, the $500 plane tickets out there? Are we able to, put our merch bill on credit cards, knowing that we have to sell a certain amount of merch on these shows to recoup that and all that? So that's, at some point, that's the biggest flag for us. It's like, how much money can we put into the Undertaking to make sure it sounds a certain way, to make sure it looks a certain way? And that's probably the most pressing thing at the moment. So we're always talking with our buddies, like, number 1 goal is to play shows. Number 2, music. 3, like, funding. It's all funding for more music. And we could cut corners with how our songs sound, but that's not something that we've chosen. We have I'm going to name drop here because it's really fascinating, but a producer in the industry named Nate Mercero. He's a guy that won Grammys with Leon Bridges and Lizzo. He wrote and produced the newest Rustin Kelly album, but he actually was in the Undertaking when we were in high school. And he's like the guy that we all stayed here, and he just shot into the music stratosphere. But he told him and our drummer are like best buds. And so he said, like, the music that you release is going to be something that you have forever.
Mm-hmm.
And so his advice to us is always like, never cut corners on how something sounds. Like, even if it's going to cost a little bit more to make it sound how you want it to sound, it's worth the money because that's something you will have forever. And so that's one of those things where it's like, we're not going to cut corners on production or recording just to save a buck here or there. But anyways, that's an interesting one. And then final thought on the timeline is then, if we're not going to just try to make the Undertaking happen if it's not working. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We could make songs all the rest of our lives, but then what we would probably do is in like 2 or 3 years, if we're maybe not having as much fun, we'd probably just shift gears and do just a different project of pop punk or like just something different, and then maybe come back to the Undertaking in a couple of years. But that's not the case at all. We're like thriving right now. We have Furnace Fest coming up. We have the Pacific Northwest run. Like, we have some really cool things that we're working on. So that's definitely not the case, but we kind of operate a little bit with the nothing is precious mindset, where we're just always trying to go out and have fun and make sure that we're having fun. And like, those are kind of our bottom lines of like, are we still in this? Like, do we have the energy? Do we have the passion? And I think the flip side of that for some bands that we see is they just kind of make the same music over and over again. They kind of get into like a neutral gear where you can kind of see that they're like not stoked to be playing shows or whatever. And that's just not something that we want to bring to our brand.
Yeah. It's like, I love the Dillinger Escape Plan, but you listen to like the last 2 records and it's kind of like, okay, you kind of hit the formula and this is what the record is.
Well, and that's for us, I feel like we're just scratching the surface on what we're writing, and our EP was better than Funeral Psalms, and Funeral Psalms was better than the stuff that we put out before we did Solid State. And the stuff that we're working on and some of the ideas that we're going to present on the next album, hopefully that would come out sometime next year, is like, they're so sick.
Yeah.
And we're really excited to be like, all right, let's keep expanding our palette. And for me as like a vocalist, I'm always trying to like challenge myself to be better and do different things, to write in a different method. So we're such a young band in terms of we've only been together for like 4 years. Yeah. So like we're good right now.
Yeah. Let's talk about Superstitions. Did finally getting to play some shows and like, have those songs from Funeral Psalms live, like influence or change any of the way you wrote or like did vocals or lyrics or?
Oh yeah, man. That's a great question. Yes, 100%. And so Funeral Psalms was very much a studio album, and there are songs on there that we could play every single song on that album, but we choose not to. And a couple, for example, are Plague and Take Me Down the River. And one of the things is playing songs live, like we try to set the energy bar extremely high the entire time that we're playing, like all gas, no breaks for 30 minutes, 9 songs in a 30-minute set, like barely any breaks. And what we started to find is when we would play Take Me Down the River in sets, that's got these 3 big, grandiose kind of operatic choruses in them. And for us, the energy would just completely like evaporate from the stage. And so we see, when we're practicing and we introduce these songs live, we start to see like, okay, that just didn't like feel good. That like we had to recover from that and kind of get our momentum going again. And then for me as a vocalist, like I'm going to have to like really stand and plan and like think about my performance to make sure I'm hitting these notes. And I felt like that was taken away from my performance of bouncing around and jumping on things and headbanging. And so that really informed what we did with Superstitions, because then we start to like play certain things. I'm trying to come up with some like really like good examples. Like the problem with being included in the Apocalypse is the first song on Funeral Psalms. The song starts with like a good like 2-step and like a circle pit part. It's got a breakdown. And so we usually start our sets like that because it gets people going. And it's not super chaotic. It's kind of straightforward. And we tried to bring a couple of those elements into the Superstition songs to where we're like, okay, this is a part where people can understand, even if it's in like a little bit of an odd time signature, they can understand what's going on and they can dance or participate in that. And that's something we're learning now because we've now played the Funeral Psalm songs and Superstition songs on a couple of tours now. And so that's informing how we're writing new stuff.
Yeah.
Of saying like, okay, I can envision us playing this song live and having this actually happen with the audience. And so that's kind of a fun challenge for us to be like, all right, like what's this thing that we could take from how people responded to this part in a song? And one of the easiest ones for us is we have a tendency to move on from riffs and parts really quickly. And that's something we're challenging ourselves to be like, okay, we typically would only play a part like 3 times.
Yeah.
Let's play it 5 times and let it kind of breathe and like have that moment kind of last a little bit longer.
Yeah, try not to just be a riff salad band.
Yeah.
I can't hold my own heart. I don't need it. I don't want it. Take it. It's still beating. I rip my life apart. I rip my life apart. Ended up 6 feet deep. Got tired of the same routines and irritated with the same old mind. Ended up 6 feet deep.
With Funeral Psalms, you talked about how like a lot of the lyrics were inspired and you drew upon the Psalms in the Bible. What inspired you lyrically for this EP?
Funeral Psalms was Funeral Psalms, how I've kind of like, it's so cliche. It's a pardon the cliche of a lyricist, but Funeral Psalms was a lot about like anxiety and depression, and Superstitions ended up being a bit more on grief and trauma. And so even in the time of writing those things, like Funeral Psalms was written when we as a culture were depressed and like anxious about like what was going to happen in the world. And I'm thinking through my lens of a parent, as a spouse, as a friend, like we were just kind of anxious as a culture. And then writing Superstitions, now looking back, like that's me writing in a post-trauma environment where we all went through this like kind of gnarly situation. And it's me kind of pouring out, like, I don't know if we're the same because of what we did. So that's kind of what it is. It's a little bit more of a trauma-based exercise of just thinking about what trauma does to us as humans. And then I actually got really geeky. I don't know if you've seen us talk about this, but the A Witch's Deathbed Confession is directly inspired by a Hellboy short story. And so that was a cool thing. Like, I love writing. I can't remember if we've talked about this, but just in like different scenarios, I'm always trying to think through what I could take from a certain situation or a line in a movie. And so I was, did you see The Green Knight?
No, I missed that one.
It's weird. It is not an easy watch. I highly recommend it though, because I feel like if we were in our 20s and watching it in college, like it would have been like one of our favorite movies. You know, it's one of those where it's like, oh, I would have loved this when I was younger. But in a line in the movie, the character says, "Perhaps you think I'm something that I'm not." And in the movie, I'm like, I was like, oh, I got to remember this line. And as soon as it ended, I like typed it into my phone because I was like, oh, that's like a really cool concept of like people thinking that you're something, but you're not. Are you pretending to be that? Are you trying to like live up to the expectations of being something like that? And that's actually a song title that's probably going to pop up on our next album. Nice. And so I was reading through a Hellboy comic that I have, and there's one called The Chained Coffin, and it's about a nun or a witch who renounces her witchiness on her deathbed, and she's like getting prayed over by this priest, and she asks the priest to chain her coffin down so that the devil can't come and steal her soul back. Oh, man. And it's all told in like a dream that Hellboy has. And so I wrote that song kind of about that. But then that's the fun part, is I take this concept and this story that I read and then kind of tie it into like, okay, what would this look like in the grand scheme of Superstitions? And like, if you listen to that, which again, as artists, we're always trying to challenge ourselves. Funeral Psalms, we wrote and recorded that pretty quickly in the pandemic, and you can kind of see the cracks on that where there's not like a general through line on that album. Mm-hmm. And Superstitions, we really dove into having all 4 of those songs tie into each other with intros and outros and interludes, and that's something we're going to probably take to the like nth degree on the next one, which is really exciting.
That's cool. That's cool. How did you guys get connected with Eric and the Charon Collective?
He reached out to us actually. That relationship is still a little bit ambiguous in my opinion. I don't really know like what he reached out to us and asked, hey, do you want me to print you CDs? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so he sent us a bunch of CDs, and we get like $6 every couple months from people buying that. But to have Superstitions on physical release was cool. We're still trying to figure out if we can print that on vinyl, but most likely we're going to save the vinyl card for the next album, and then we might go back later to do Superstitions on vinyl, but that would be something really cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
It costs so much money.
It does. I have a closet full of it from when I had a label.
Yes, yeah.
It's great.
And that's the thing too, is I don't want to pre-order 500 vinyl records and then I'm sitting on 450 of them.
Right. Yeah.
and dude, if you're listening to this, pretty please go to the Solid State website and buy the last 36 copies of Funeral Psalms, because that's almost sold out, and that would be a pretty cool accomplishment for us to be able to sell that out.
Yes. Yeah. That'd be great. You talked about you guys were playing Furnace Fest. You were kind of like the last band in, like fan voted in. Like, one, how did you get on that list? And two, how does it feel to have like the community support you and be like, yes, the Undertaking should be at Furnace Fest?
If there's any proof that we're doing like something right, like granted, I wish they would have just asked us outright to play the festival. But if it's proof that we're doing anything right, it's that we've worked really hard at connecting with people and talking to people and responding to people's messages and commenting. Man, I feel like that is the lowest hanging fruit with social media, that people are commenting on your post and bands could easily respond and engage. And I see it all the time where they don't, and I don't understand. Yeah. And so for us, that was kind of proof that we're doing something right. So long story short, this is 2023 and 2022, they did it. And we got tagged in that post of like, hey, we got one spot, we're going to let the fans vote for that. We got tagged in it. And all of a sudden we were like, oh, we got a couple pings from people. Like people are actually commenting our name on this post. Like, oh, we should push this. And we got through like the first round. And then it kind of became the Wild Wild West last year, where people were buying like ads and using bots. And I think it got a little messy. And it's fine. I don't care how it went, but I know from the Furnace Fest people, it got a little bit out of hand. And so this year it came up again, and we're like, hey, I guess we're going to ask you guys to vote for us for for Furnace Fest again. And people came through and did it. And it's the coolest thing. Yeah. One, to be able to play that festival. I have like a little bit of memorabilia printed off from some tours, from some cool shows, a couple things from Solid State that I have for the band. And this is one that I'll print off a nice copy of this poster, because then for the rest of the time, I'm on a flyer with MXPX and Turnstile and Hatebreed, Terror.
Ready for Utopia. It's ridiculous.
No, I mean, and so we actually got the first advance email this past week, and we're on a list with. I'll send you the list, and it's like, what is going on? This can't be real. And we're like legit just waiting for it to like be like, oh, that was actually a joke. So we're stoked. Honestly, I got nervous this week for the first time. I'm not really a nervous guy, but all of a sudden I was like, oh man, we got to like perform really well. Yeah. But we keep joking that we're going to play at like 10 a.m. behind the porta potties. 2 people are going to watch us, but I think it's going to be like 1 o'clock on Friday on a cool stage, and that's just cool. So going back to the fan thing, at some point, like we legit just asked everybody that we knew, hey, we have a chance to play this really cool festival. If you don't mind taking 30 seconds and clicking on this link and voting for us, that would be a huge deal. We don't pander our friends very often, so we are definitely not the band that like anytime we have a show coming up, we're like sending out texts and be like, hey, come to the show, whatever. Like, so people in our circles knew like, hey, if Austin's reaching out about this thing, it's a big deal. And dude, it's so sick. It's like I said earlier, it's getting signed to Solid State and being able to put a record out that'll live on that label for the rest of time, and then being able to play Furnace Fest this year is like the two things that we've done that are the coolest.
That's awesome. That's super rad. Yeah, I've been like, I went to all the original Furnace Fest, but I've not been to the Reincarnated Festival. And it's like, looking at the lineup this year, I was like, I want to go, but I'm going to Spain for my 10-year anniversary. So
oh heck yeah, you got. I
was like, Spain wins.
Yeah. Well, I kind of put it out into the universe because we toured last year and we went to Birmingham and we walked over to the Sloth furnaces, and when I saw it, I was like, okay, this is really cool. I want to go. So when I got home, I sat down with my wife and we figured out like what it would look like for me to actually go. Cause same thing, like I see the lineup the last 2-3 years or whatever. And I'm just like, dude, this is like a hardcore mecca. You got to go. It just never was able to make it work because of kids and time off of work and away from family, money, all that stuff. And so this year we were just like, all right, we got to make this happen. Like I'm going to do it. So I was already planning on going. And I think because of that, like it made it easier to be like, all right, like let's push for this and make it happen. There's part of me that still wishes I was just going to watch. Yeah. Now there's a little bit of the stress that we have to perform, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Your show in Philadelphia was recorded for 856. Did you know that was being recorded, and what was that whole experience like?
That's funny. So Fear and Loathing is the basement show. It's a house venue that this guy puts on, and the story of that comes from we're booking our tour with Meadows and Empty. We were working with Michael Rasco, a booking agent who was helping us out with some stuff. And we could not find any venues. We emailed, like when you're doing the DIY venue stuff, you're just emailing a bunch of venues, and we got turned down by like 20 venues because the tour is like, they didn't think it was good enough or whatever. And then I'm like, all right, we got to find some house shows. So there's a band called Plead the Widow's Cause in New Jersey, sick Christian band that's out in that area. They're doing some cool stuff. And I was, Brett, the guitarist, helped me find a bunch of house shows. So we ended up connecting with Ian at Fear and Loathing, which is the coolest show we'll ever play, because you end up in Philadelphia in a basement with 50 people, feels like it's 200 people. Yeah. It's 120 degrees down there. Like that's hardcore. And there's part of us that just wishes that we could just only play house shows and basement shows for the rest of our time. Like it was just so unreal. And then when Ian booked it, he reached out to Sonny, and immediately Sonny, I guess he's just super chill with the local Philly scene. Anytime there's a Philly show, he tries to make it out. Mm-hmm. And so he responded and said, hey, I think I have that date open. Like, I'll put you guys down. And then we didn't hear anything from him up until the day of the show. So at some point, Ian had reached out again. Hey, are you still interested in coming? And no response. And then we are packing up. We stayed at my buddy's house in Baltimore that morning, and all of a sudden Ian texts and he's like, Sonny's coming. And I think everybody on the tour package was like, oh shit. This is real. Yeah. And so again, not like a nervous thing, but then all of a sudden, like right before the show, he shows up and you're like, okay, all right, we gotta be good. We gotta be good. Which, like in hindsight, it was a bit of a bummer. If you watch the set, like the sound is terrible and whatnot, but you can like feel what that was, and he captured it so perfectly. So to be able to get 856, get a video out, like that's one of the coolest pieces of, I don't know what you'd call it, just digital, a digital asset for the band. It's just invaluable. It was pretty cool. And the dude is a professional, man. It was 120 degrees and muggy and humid in that basement. And he stayed in there for 4 hours, captured all 5 bands. There are 5 bands, and all 5 of those videos are now out on his YouTube channel. And so it's just cool to be able to see like that whole night. And how that went. And it was wild. Like the guy with the cookie sheet is the owner. He was the venue guy. That's Ian. And at some point he reached out before the show and was like, hey, could we make this a weapons show? And I was like, what weapons show? What are you talking about? He's like, yeah, cookie sheets and like fluorescent light tubes, and we can like smash them over each other. And I was like, that kind of sounds dangerous. And he was like, okay, rain check. I was like, yeah, rain for sure. So halfway through our set, he busts out the cookie sheet and he starts smacking people on the head. And I don't know if you see in the video, he like actually bends it.
Yeah.
You're like, what is going on?
I'm haunted by a fading ghost, following me as I go, watching me the day goes, golden and I'll ever know. Creatures chanting their curse for free, angels bleeding my life for free, demons and their curse for free. Witches dying to say unto my brain reminds me to give my
When you guys are on the road, I don't know if because of your small band doing like band tours or whatever, but like, I mean, you love baseball, but you're also a nerd. Like, are each of you just on your phone doing your own thing, or like as a collective group, are there things that interest all of you that you're enjoying on the road?
We haven't really toured enough to come up with a rhythm. Our tours are typically overpacked, and so the pace of touring has been not overwhelming. It's like I usually download like a bunch of movies that I'm like, oh, when we're in the van, I'm going to watch these movies and like play video games and stuff. And that just kind of never happens. I drive a lot too. But Johnny always has his Switch. So he'll usually have a game that he's working through. Driver gets to pick the music most of the time. So we're always kind of listening to music. The East Coast one was fun. The Padres were playing the Mets. That was a terrible week when we were on tour on the East Coast because we played the Mets and the Braves. We played the Braves that weekend and we got our butts kicked. So like literally on tour, we were 1-7 the entire time, but we were watching like every game. We put it in the van, connected to the Bluetooth, and we were watching and stuff. But it was depressing because we like lost a ton that week. Could have been so much cooler. But yeah, like collectively, I think we're all adults and kind of know each other's ins and outs. And that's always one of our things. Like, hey, if you're like feeling off today, just put your headphones in, kind of disappear. When we were on the West Coast last year, going up and down the coast, that's when the Andor episode where they escaped from the prison, spoiler alert.
That's so good.
And so I was like watching that in the van, like freaking out with what's the line he keeps repeating? Like one more step or whatever. I can't remember.
One way out.
One way out. Yeah. And so I'm like tearing up in the van, like watching that.
Then they get to the top. Oh my God.
Yeah.
The heartbreaking.
And we were like getting into Seattle when I was watching that because I can remember where we were. So we try to keep up on our stuff. Like we haven't had time as a band to go to like a movie. So I remember Wakanda Forever came out when we were touring with Meadows on the West Coast, and Christian wanted to go see Wakanda Forever, but there was just no time in the schedule. And so that would be a fun thing. We got to go to a Cincinnati Reds game.
Nice.
When we were in Cincinnati earlier this year, which was wild because they were terrible then, and then they went on their streak.
Yeah.
And we were trying to get Will Meyer's attention and yelling at him that we like drove from San Diego to come watch him play. And then eventually his wife hit us up on Instagram and was like, yo, for reals? And we were like, no, but we're here rooting for him.
That's awesome. I mean, you guys are working on new stuff. You're playing shows.
Yeah. I think just I hope people understand like we're a small little band that's just having the time of our lives, and this is just the coolest thing that we get to do. And so yeah, we're prepping another album. I did it backwards. Actually, I already have the artwork for it and the title for it. There's a lot of stuff that I already have in place, like song titles. It's kind of the way my brain works. I try to build something first and then work towards it. We got 8-9 demos that are cool that we're going to start fleshing out and making them a real thing. This summer was weird for us. One of our guitarists had a kid, so he's got a baby. One of our guitarists moved. My mom had a kidney transplant. So there was like some weird stuff that we weren't as productive this summer as we wanted to be, which sounds weird. But you guys get it. If like when life starts to get a little bit weird, it like upsets the creative part of things. So we're ready to kind of get into our, writing mode and kind of push that forward. We have 2 local shows here in San Diego. We're actually playing with Will Haven, who's a band that's playing on Furnace Fest.
Good.
Yeah, so they're doing a little run, and we're playing with them at Brick by Brick, which is one of our local venues. So we actually hit up Shannon, who books the venue, and we're like, hey, we're playing Furnace Fest in a couple months. Can we hop on a show prior to kind of dust off the the gears and stuff. And she's like, yeah, Will Haven. And I was like, oh, that's a sick connection, because then we're playing with them at Furnace Fest in a couple weeks. And then we're going up to Seattle and Portland and Spokane with Ongoing Concept, Fall Star, and No Home and Lightworker. Really cool run. But it's 4 days, 4 shows. And so that'll be a blast. And then we're trying to get out to the Midwest. So we got a ton of stuff going. It's fun. We're in the fun planning stage, because we're trying to do the Midwest in April, which is an area that we have not done yet.
That I don't want to hear. Get out of my head. Get out of my head. Come on, chaining down my coffin. Coughing up a sound that I don't want to hear.
Thanks for listening to As the Story Grows. Our intro music was written and composed by Jeremy Hunt. The As the Story Grows theme is by Bob Nana. If you like what you hear, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and give us a rating and review. If you'd like to support the show financially, you can join us at patreon.com/asthestorygrows. Be a part of our community and join the ongoing conversation over on Discord. If you enjoy this episode, share it on social media with your friends. Much appreciated, and thanks for listening.
I never felt so young